when he brought up the DEI scanning for the words on school websites, he described it as dystopian, such intense language being used so casually, such a serious and realistic matter because it's actually happening.
Across the country, DEI language is being erased from websites and mission statements. But what if equity doesn't need a label to live? Hey there, it's Angela. Today, my arts policy students join me to explore how we embed DEI in our DNA, beyond the buzzwords. This is Arts Redefined. I'm so excited for this conversation. How much did you think about DEI before this class?
I thought about it more frequently in terms of my dad's job, just because it's relevant in his workplace a lot. It was more of a topic of conversation a lot within my family, but in terms of school, I'm a business major and we know that they don't really address that type of stuff. So prior to this class, especially not academically, I feel like I wasn't that knowledgeable on DEI in terms of how it would affect me as a student in higher education.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat. I was a previous business student, so kind of comparing about how the business realm talks about DEI and how the arts realm, it's obviously introduced a lot more. But prior to this class, I didn't really think about it too much as it would affect me as a student in education.
My experience with DEI has mostly been in outside leadership roles. I agree that I didn't talk about it a ton in classroom settings, but I was a resident assistant for a little bit and I did various leadership programs and I've been on different exec boards, and I feel like in all of those they really emphasize the importance of DEI and making sure that our leadership was inclusive and accessible to others. But I agree with Caroline and Josh that it wasn't mentioned a ton in the classroom for me.
I really thought about DEI a lot just because of the current political climate and regards to how DEI has become a politicized topic, whereas I don't feel like it used to be as much. It became a dirty word almost without fully expanding upon what it actually looks like and what it truly means. And so I think it was something that I was concerned about prior to this class. I could never have expected the changes that would be made that would affect me personally, as well as in terms of my education. I never really expected them to come into the academic world. I just kind of expected them to stay more in that political aspect. So that was a bit of a shock.
Vividly remember, I was at a business frat interview my sophomore year, and I remember getting a question about DEI. I think it was just super general about what does it mean to you? And I just remember it throwing me off because at that time it Lauren said, I feel like it wasn't super academically, it was more political. So I just remember getting that question being super thrown, but since this class, it's so much more relevant.
I'm actually in a business fraternity, so we've had to go through interviews and everything, and our chapter is kind of special because we stand on 3 pillars. It's philanthropy, brotherhood, and professionalism, but we have an international focus. So we welcome all majors. I know a lot of international students and students who study abroad like to come to our chapter, but I can't think of any questions that we asked during the recruitment process that have to deal with DEI.
So when you hear DEI, try to separate what you think of DEI now, but prior to class this semester, what was DEI? What did that mean when you heard that?
In general, it's just kind of about paying attention to everyone. It doesn't necessarily mean being disproportionate or anything. It's having humanity and caring for everyone and embrace the differences that everyone has rather than use them as something that is a negative. From a more broad standpoint is kind of how I always thought of it before this class.
I feel like DEI should be a positive word. And like you said, it's to acknowledge and recognize differences and be able to be around others and notice it. Since the new administration, or even just the past few years, it has created a way more negative connotation for the term. Now I hear it and I get scared.
So much of DEI is stuff you learn when you're 6 years old. You know what I mean? People are different from you and you should treat others the way you want to be treated and everyone deserves to be included. That's playground talk in first grade. And there's such simple life lessons at their core, but I agree that it's become, I think, especially in the past 5 years or so, but even before then, it became so heavily politicized and it became about labels. And I think the labeling is what makes it really difficult because at its core, I do think DEI is a concept that a lot of people naturally do lean towards. People understand that others are different from them, and people at least should understand that everyone should be treated equally and we should include others, but we've strayed so far from the core of what those words mean that we've like politicized the DEI, the acronym, and that's what stood out to me, I think.
I always thought about DEI as a more positive term, and I've heard from a lot of different classes. I wouldn't say targeting white men, but I've heard time and time again it's a white man's world, and I was often confused by that. Yes, I do understand the opportunities. Going through these classes, it's really made me realize how I understand who I am, and yes, some opportunities are given to me more frequently and easily, and it's just learning there are other people that don't get the same opportunities as I do, and understanding that and embracing those who are trying a lot harder than me and celebrating all the hard work that they do to be on the same playing field almost for opportunities.
Caroline, I want to go back to you real quick about, you said when you hear DEI now it scares you.
I wouldn't say scares. It's more so just such a touchy subject now. And I feel when people bring it up, you don't know where their mind is at in terms of DEI, or like when it comes up, if they're like, oh, it's about celebrating differences, or if you don't know, it's going to go super political. Like people are bringing religion into it. So I think it's more just uncomfortable because you don't know where everyone else stands on the phrase.
So let's fast forward to class and Senate Bill 1 here in Ohio. Were there aspects of that bill that surprised you? And if so, what and why?
I interned for a lobbying firm. At that time, it was SB 83. So my initial reaction when they turned it to SB 1 again was just like they didn't get what they wanted, so they made it at like the forefront. So that just kind of threw me off. That was my first initial okay, they're really serious about this.
I know what surprised me the most is the fact that professors' syllabuses and everything all have to be posted online, and kind of at any time any professor could be audited. And yes, it puts our education at risk, but it also puts the professors at risk as well.
I just think that if professors are feeling like they're being treated unfairly, they deserve the right to go and portray that to the university. That's something that they should have the right to do. So I was really shocked by that. And then also, I think the just very vague wording of certain things in the bill was really weird to me. For example, you can't talk about anything that would be considered controversial. I think there's a lot of aspects of the legislation that is just kind of muddy, and it leads to a lot of confusion and gray area.
You were all given the opportunity to take policy to look at and create what you wanted to focus on, and you all came up with an idea to speak with another individual at another university outside of Ohio. How did that come about? And then just briefly, let's intro Oliver, and then we'll go ahead and roll that conversation.
I know that this is not the only state in the country that is currently experiencing some changes to DEI policies. I know that the current administration is sort of causing threats across the country to DEI policies. And I have a lot of friends in a lot of different places that aren't Ohio. So it was interesting to me to compare what's going on here and look at it on a national level. I met Oliver last summer, and he goes to school in Texas, and I knew that he was super passionate about DEI, but also was in a state that I at the time assumed, but now know, has had some serious DEI threats going on. And so I was curious what his perspective was as somebody who was passionate about DEI, but also maybe couldn't be in the same way he once was just due to the current environment at his university. And I really thought that was important, just to kind of shine a light on the fact that Ohio's not alone, and here's what might be in our future looking ahead.
We're going to hear from Oliver, and then let's come back after and do a roundup on...
Hi, Oliver.
Hello.
So we are students in a policy and advocacy in the arts class at Miami University, and we have spent a lot of the semester discussing how legislation affects the arts, with a specific focus on Senate Bill 1 in Ohio, which essentially has decided to ban topics related to DEI in higher education in public universities. So we've spent a lot of time throughout the semester. It went from being a potential ban to getting approved as an executive order, and now it is officially going to be banned in the state of Ohio. And it seemed like there was a similar one in Texas through my research, but I'll let you talk about that. And so the purpose of our podcast is to connect with other students to see how DEI bans are different across the country and how DEI bans are affecting other students and other artists nationally, instead of just on a statewide level, to show the magnitude of this issue that we're really facing. So that's our purpose. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about yourself, your major, what you're studying, where you're studying, things that are important to you, your values. The floor is yours.
Hi, My name is Oliver Fiorello. I just finished my junior year of my undergrad for violin performance at the University of Texas at Austin, Butler School of Music. It's been my first time living in the South here. I grew up in the Northeast where I did not really have to worry about DEI things as a queer and trans person. So I think I could bring a pretty interesting perspective.
You like living in the South so far? Is it like super different?
Yes, it is very different socially, culturally, weather-wise. It's like it is completely different from how I grew up.
You were in Connecticut before, right?
Yes, yes, I was.
How often do you go back, and sort of what's your experience when you are back?
So now when I go home, it's mostly to visit friends. It is so nice when I go back because I'm used to it. Also, part of it is because even in Austin, in a very liberal place, it's still a city in the South. It's a city and it's a liberal city, but it's a liberal city in the South, which means it's not that liberal according to Northeastern standards. So it's scary.
I explained a little bit about SB1, which is Ohio's equivalent of DEI bans in higher education. At Miami University, for a little bit, it was kind of behind the scenes, changing like policies and changing the way that organizations were structured. It seemed like they didn't really want to comply, but felt like they had to comply. And so they would make these changes so they could keep the programming up, but it would go under a different name or something. But a couple weeks ago, they decided to get rid of our Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion going into the next school year, which has been met with a lot of backlash. And that's sort of the first big thing that we've noticed at the university. So that's a little bit about how our school is operating. And we were curious if you've noticed any major changes at your university regarding DEI bans or just with this new political administration in the past semester.
I think there was already push even before the new administration to getting rid of some of our DEI related things just because of the nature of being a school in the South and those kind of topics being a little bit more sensitive to the people in Texas. As of the new administration and as of last semester, we had tried changing the Gender and Sexuality Center, which was an amazing resource for so many people. I think I got group therapy there in freshman year, like just from like a moving to the South, I'm scared standpoint. So many good things about that place. They tried to change it to the Women's Center because they thought that that might be received better, but it looks like they're about to shut that one down too. They also closed our Multicultural Center, which is in the same building. And then one of the first things that they did was they ended up laying off a bunch of our women and gender studies teachers. That was a big thing. That's kind of crazy. People are trying to get those degrees right now. I was supposed to be a part of a team of students putting on a like pre-June queer composer themed concert, and it just got completely shut down by the school. They banned drag shows on campus. And then we had Texas Day of Drag, and they had a little peaceful protest and queer education stuff going on, and drag queens came in and did everyone's makeup. I noticed some changes within the music school specifically, just because I think more people are less afraid to be out about their beliefs, especially Republicans now and conservative people. And we learned that a lot of people in the music school voted for this new administration. And that sort of caused some strain socially within my class and some other classes. I had my junior recital this past semester, and I did all queer, mostly contemporary composers. And there was a little bit of debate of whether or not I'd be able to advertise it as a queer composers concert. So I ended up just using a lot of symbolism right there. Got the upside down pink triangle. I was too afraid to market it as a queer composers concert.
Present academic threats to have marketed it as a queer composer concert, or just social threats?
I don't think there would have been academic threats, just because the people that were judging my junior recital, they were all string faculty, and the string faculty for the most part I know is pretty liberal.
Going back to the point that you said about your university laying off like a vast majority of professors and staff who deal and teach gender studies. Do you like know any insights about what those students are going to do or like what their next game plan is if they are pursuing a degree in gender studies?
Honestly, I have no idea because I didn't know anyone personally in the gender studies degree path. I do know part of it had to do with the gender sexuality center getting shut down because a lot of those teachers were volunteers there, and I know that some of the counseling staff that worked in that center ended up just quitting outright because they were tired of not being treated fairly by the school and the threats of being laid off. So I think a lot of it had to do probably with that kind of side of things too.
Did your university send out a big post about changes that are happening at the university, or is it all under wraps behind the scene?
It's pretty quiet. The one time that they would email us was when protests got to a point where having, in quotes, to get authorities involved, and they were basically like, stick with us as we navigate the new changes for the new administration. You're all like, okay, that's not gonna stop anything. One of the other things that was really subtle and not talked about was they started scanning all of these school websites for words related to DEI and like trying to take down or alter the pages that had DEI related descriptors. So that was a big thing.
That's wild.
Yeah, I don't know what the point was with that, but it was just something that people started noticing. We're like, this is kind of strange and a little, a little dystopian.
You obviously are an individual who is affected by DEI bans getting put into place. How do you envision your future as a queer and trans artist going forward? Do you pitch? I know that you said that for your junior recital, you were too scared and decided to ultimately not market it as a concert with queer composers. Do you foresee yourself in the future trying to step out of that and really fight back against DEI bans? Do you think that you'll probably end up trying to comply so you can be more, commercially successful in a lot of ways? Have you thought about that at all? I was just curious kind of what your next steps, since you are living in a world where the DEI bans are getting more and more restrictive, what your next steps were.
So I think, because I have thought about this, and a lot of what I do outside of school is very strictly queer related. I am in a queer punk band, like as an electric violinist. And that's sort of, I will advertise that on my social media as much as I can. Unfortunately, I think the best steps for me to take are, I don't want to say complying because I feel part of me is not complying just by existing and trying to get more time in the spotlight. But I don't see myself trying to do another queer composers concert, mostly because I've already figured out the theme for my senior recital. What I am doing though is I've ultimately decided to leave Texas after my undergraduate years. I think I just have more resources and people that are close to me that I can count on up north, northeast specifically. And right now, my energy is going towards making sure that I am safe and that my close ones up here are safe, and less about protesting and fighting it and more just on civil disobedience.
That's a great point. Do you have any other colleagues at different schools that are kind of faced with the same issues that you have been dealing with?
Man, the only people I know that are in the South that are also queer and trans are people that I am not close to as much anymore. Most of my other queer and trans musician friends are either here with me or they're up north. But I have honestly been trying to convince some people here to come with me. It seems like a good time to get out of here.
What do your queer and trans colleagues at UT Austin plan on doing after graduation? Like, do any of them have dissenting opinions on it than you do?
A lot of them feel stuck here because this is where all of their contacts are, like networking wise. A lot of them also want to help in the fight against it here, which is super commendable. I don't know how I would maintain my mental health and do that at the same time. I have some friends that are actually from the North like me that are here, and they're all pretty much trying to find ways to go back in like a way that will also still progress their careers.
It's so upsetting to hear that the current administration is almost like pushing people out of the places that they network to basically find safety to pursue their careers. That's devastating.
Accessibility and inclusion, was that something you thought about when you were on your college search? Like, I'm sure it was, but like, how much of a factor was that?
That was the big thing between my final two schools, which were Boston Conservatory and UT Austin. And I was a little afraid of moving to the South. I ultimately ended up deciding UT Austin, one, because of financial reasons, and two, because my teacher was also queer and was very adamant about standing up for me if ever needed or anything like that. It was a pretty big factor as somebody who was at that point only 3 years transition. So I was also worried about, I'm 17 still and I'm on hormones and I'm moving to a state where that is illegal to be on hormones before you're 18. So dealing with that was a big thing that I didn't even mention. And I tried to work through it to, get to a school that was financially more accessible to me.
Oliver, you've done a great job answering all of my questions.
Yeah, I feel like this was super helpful.
Thank you again, Oliver, for taking your time out to speak with us. Everything you said was definitely very informative, and both Caroline and I are super excited to bring your insights back to another podcast and
Of course.
back to Ohio's current situation with administration and college DEI bans.
We just finished listening to that conversation with Oliver, who is in Texas. Anything surprise you or stand out?
I think what was most surprising to me is how he explained how he almost has to flee his state to pursue his career goals and dreams. I thought that was super eye-opening, and without talking to him, I wouldn't even think that people would be fleeing their own states to pursue their own goals because of the current administration.
It was like how casually he addressed such intense topics. If you actually listen to what he was saying, Josh said the escaping, but using the words complying and just worrying about him and his friend's safety. And then when he brought up the DEI scanning for the words on school websites, he described it as dystopian. So just such intense language being used so casually. I just think it just kind of threw me off, but I don't want to say in a negative or positive way, just interesting how he addressed it in such a serious and realistic matter, because it's actually happening.
I also found it to be very interesting how he talked about how when these laws changed in Texas, they kind of realized that people in the music education program that he was a part of, a lot of them voted for Donald Trump in the election, just voted against a lot of what Oliver obviously believes, and honestly Oliver's identity as a whole in general, and how that was really kind of shocking to Oliver. But also how that really caused a lot of tension within a classroom environment. I think it's really important that everyone feels safe, especially in an environment like a classroom. And I think it just kind of shows forecasting maybe what things will look like a little bit more here in Ohio because of laws changing.
It made me just kind of sad for him and for people like him. If you look at the wall behind him, being part of the LGBTQ community is clearly a massive part of his life. It's not something he's ashamed of. He's pretty proud of it. The one that really stood out to me was the fact that he didn't feel comfortable marketing his junior recital as being made up of queer composers, when that was something that I know he was super passionate about, and he just didn't know what the reception would be like, if the professors would allow it, if he just didn't want to because it, would garner negative attention. That stood out to me as something I was like, well, and 11 months ago, I think that would have been something he felt much more comfortable doing. And that made me sad both for him and then just for other people in Texas. That's a big school, it's a big state. I'm sure there's, thousands of other college students going through exactly the same thing who are struggling with the exact same debate of, can I be myself or not? Is it safe to be myself? Can I be comfortable being myself? And it was just, yeah, sad.
So, as we wrap up the conversation, what thoughts do you have regarding stripping DEI out of college campuses? Does that change your behavior? Does it change your mindset? How does it relate to you as arts management, entrepreneurs, all of that?
I would say for me, I already am feeling like I already am feeling like the way that I have to act is different almost. I am a tour guide here at the university, and we recently just got an announcement at the university that they're getting rid of our CSDI, our Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion, which is a really, really big resource and space for students in our student center. So, like, very much at the core of our campus here at Miami. And so, when we're giving tours on campus, a big part of what we do is just share the resources that are provided to students and doing that in an inclusive way. We actually had the people who run the CSDI at the beginning of the school year come and talk to us about all the resources that they have and everything that they have to offer to students, so that way we could properly depict that to prospective students when they're coming to visit the university. Like recently, ever since SB1 passed and the university kind of started making changes slowly, for a while we didn't hear anything from the tour guide office, but eventually they were like, you can still reference the resources for now, but you can't mention the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion because it's not going to be here when they come, which is just already really sad in and of itself, because they really do offer a lot of students a lot of really great resources, but also it just felt so fake, and I just felt like I had to filter myself a lot. Like, I just don't know what's acceptable to be said anymore. And also, I don't know because anything can be reported, right? Or anybody can get upset about anything. Does that include what I talk about on my campus tours? Because we're a really big part of the university. And we're kind of the forefront of what prospective students and families are seeing. So if they know, this is what's allowed and what's not allowed at universities, and then we're talking about it on our tours, that can be a little bit challenging. And then also with the stripping of the CSDI, I think it's just really, and just with SB1 in general, I think it's just really alienating our more diverse students that we have and our minority students that we have here at the university, because we already are a primarily white institution. And that's something that I think everyone's pretty aware of. You can't really not be aware of it. And because of that, I think it's really important that in order to make those students not feel alienated, that they have spaces and resources to make them feel welcome and a part of the community here. And I think trying to make things feel equal is really just going to make students feel alienated, because at the end of the day, it's not really creating any kind of equality or anything. It's just getting rid of the equity aspect of things, which is really frustrating. And I think we should encourage diversifying our campus, and I think this is just a really, really big step backwards in that.
Thinking about it, I'm sure the seniors can say more on this, but like, as a junior, knowing I only have a year left, my mind goes to post-grad, but more for incoming students, because in high school, granted it wasn't this big of a deal, but in high school, depending on what classes you're taking, you're not like educated on SB1 specifically, unless you're in like a political class. So thinking about like incoming students, our colleges making them aware of this, but more so because Oliver touched on them getting rid of the women and gender studies professors, which eventually means that those majors are going to be gone, is like students coming into school thinking that they're going to major in this, and then within a year or by the time they're already here, it being like completely gone. So my head is more so trying to educate the people coming into school so that they're aware of not what they're getting into, but just like what is actually available to them, as opposed to what they think is going to be available to them.
Well, is that something that then you would recommend, or would you, if you were an incoming student, freshman, would you rethink where you would go to school based on what's happening here?
I think the people who, such as like Oliver, who it is like a major part of their life, I think they would. I would hope that like personally people would think about that before coming to schools, or even just like applying with the right, like if they have the right education on the bill or other bills that kind of have that effect. Because you can't really, like Lauren said, she's a tour guide. They're not learning it from going on tours, because if you can't talk about it, they're not going to know. So they kind of have to do their own research. So I think the right people will do their own research in finding out where they're going to get that like best education.
I think a lot of people know on like a broader scale. Not that everything should be like bipartisan or anything, but I do remember like when I was applying to schools, I'd be like, okay, like the politics of the state does matter to me a little. Like it does. It makes a difference. And I mean, obviously there are other factors at play. Oliver was saying that the faculty at UT Austin were some of the strongest for violin performance. And so sometimes that wins. Sometimes like you are going for an education. And I know in my case, like finances played a really big part in it. And like sometimes saving a lot of money on your education is worth going to a state where you maybe don't agree politically with a lot of the ways that it leans. But I remember that was like a major part of my decision. It was a pretty big factor, and my mom and I talked about it a good amount. And I do think that like had I been applying now instead of 4 or 5 years ago, I think that would have been a pretty big part of my conversation at least. And I do think that students will probably obviously we don't know yet, but my assumption would be that application numbers for schools like Ohio State or Miami would probably trend downward in the next year.
Okay, to wrap it up, what advice would you give lawmakers on how legislation directly affects you that they may not have realized?
I think that you have to be careful with how broad you are, because then you're going to end up hurting a lot of people that you did not intend to. I think that if you are going to go and outrightly kind of get rid of conversations surrounding the rights of certain people or do things that are going to negatively affect the rights and the ability for people to express who they identify as or just express themselves in a positive way, you should be more specific, because there are people who maybe they didn't necessarily want the bill to affect that they're very much so going to affect. I'm particularly worried about women in the STEM field and their scholarships. I don't necessarily know that was something that maybe they originally were focused on in the bill, but I think it's something that's going to be affected. And then also people with disabilities. We have a Center for Disability Services here at Miami, and I really think that people with disabilities are going to be affected, because in a way that's equity and that's inclusion and that's ensuring that people who disproportionately are not, classes are just not made for people with disabilities, whether that be physical or intellectual. And I think that with the broadness of this law, it's really going to affect people that they didn't realize. So I would say be specific, and also I really hope that you do evaluate how this affects people and that you make changes accordingly.
Okay, that looks like Lauren summed it up for the group, right? I appreciate it. Okay, great.
Mhm.
Caroline, Lauren, and Josh, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your effort and the depth in which you went to really understand the ramifications of this legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.